Eliza Vance walked out of Vance Hall at 5 in the morning, carrying a folio of documents that would, in 3 months, bring her stepmother to a wedding her stepmother had come to ruin. She did not yet know about the wedding. She did not yet know about the Duke. She knew only that the footman at the gate had been paid 3 months past for not noticing such things, and that the price he had taken was the price of a small bag of silver, and a long memory of who in that house had been kind to him when he was a boy. Beyond the gate, the road into the village smelled of wet hawthorn and turned earth. Spring had broken through the long chill of February, and the puddles caught the low sky in flat, silvering coins. The folio under her cloak weighed less than a child's shoe, and would, before the year was out, weigh more than a house. Lady Cassandra Vance, her father's widow, the woman Eliza had once been forced to call mother, was still asleep in the bed she had taken for her own. Lady Cassandra slept until 10, when the household ran itself. Eliza had 2 hours, and she had counted them 3 times before she stepped out of the gate. The folio under her cloak contained 4 letters in her father's neat, slightly slanted hand, 2 pages from the household ledger that ought not to exist, and a single sealed packet she had not opened, because she did not yet know what she would do with what was inside it. Her mother's pearl pendant lay cool and small against her throat under her collar. She had not removed it in 5 years. By the time the church bell struck 6, she was at the magistrate's door, and by the time the magistrate's housekeeper opened it, she had decided she would rather be hanged than walk back into that house. "Miss," said the housekeeper. The woman's eyes were sharp, despite the early hour. She had the look of someone who had seen a great many people on the worst morning of their lives. "I have evidence of a fraud," Eliza said. Her voice was steadier than she had any right to expect. "I would like to speak to Sir Henry, please." "Sir Henry has a guest at breakfast." "Then I will wait." The housekeeper's expression shifted, not unkindly, but with the alert attention of a woman who had recognized a moment that mattered. She stepped aside. "Come into the morning room, miss. I will tell him you are here." Eliza did not sit. She stood at the window of the magistrate's morning room, watching the rooks lift and settle in the elm at the gate, and she counted them. Counting was a habit her mother had taught her, the year her mother was ill. Number the rooks, number the window panes, number the breaths between one fear and the next. It was a child's trick that had not stopped working. She had counted to 38 when the door opened and Sir Henry came in. He was not alone. The man behind Sir Henry was perhaps 28 years of age, broad-shouldered in a dark coat that had clearly been ridden in, and he stopped in the doorway when he saw her. He did not stop because she was beautiful, although by any measure she was. He stopped because he had taken the room in the way some men learned in war, and others never learned at all. And he had registered that the woman at the window had not been weeping, and that whatever she had come to say would matter to more than one person. "Miss Vance," said Sir Henry. He did not sound surprised. He sounded as though he had been waiting for her, possibly for years. "May I present His Grace, the Duke of Marbury? He is visiting." The Duke inclined his head. "Miss Vance." His voice was a low register, and the kind of clipped that suggests private school and a great deal of self-control. He smelled, faintly, of leather and bergamot, the smell of a man who had been on horseback at first light and had washed his hands but had not yet changed his coat. Eliza had practiced, all the way down the road, what she would say to the magistrate. She had not practiced what she would say in front of a duke. She lifted her chin a fraction. "I have brought my father's papers," she said, "and an account of what my stepmother has done with them. I would prefer to be heard quickly. I have 2 hours." Sir Henry looked at the Duke. Something passed between them that was not surprise, that was the opposite of surprise. 2 hours, said the Duke quietly. Then we ought to begin. The folio opened on Sir Henry's desk like a wound. 4 letters in her father's neat, slanted hand. 2 ledger pages with numbers on them that had been scratched out and replaced. The sealed packet, still closed. She told Sir Henry to open the packet, and when he hesitated, she told him again, the second time without permission, and with an honesty she had not intended to offer to a magistrate this early in the morning. She had not opened it herself, she said, because she was afraid of what she would do if she were alone when she saw what was inside. Sir Henry broke the seal. It was a copy of her father's true will. Not the version that had been read aloud at her father's funeral 5 years before. Not the version Lady Cassandra produced whenever a creditor or a magistrate or a curious cousin came to ask. The witness signatures were her father's old steward, who had taken pneumonia 6 months after her father and never recovered, and the rector of Mossbridge, who had moved to Yorkshire and would have forgotten his own name if asked the wrong way. The estate, in this version, was Eliza's. The dowry was Eliza's. The house was Eliza's. Lady Cassandra's settlement was an annuity of £100 a year, not the £14,000 a year she had been drawing. The Duke read it once and did not speak. He read it again. Then he looked up. "Where did you find this?" She told him, in the spine of her mother's prayer book. She did not allow her voice to break. Her father, she explained, must have hidden it before his time ran short. Must have known, at the end, what kind of woman his second wife had become, or had begun to become. He was not stupid. He had hidden the true will where he believed Cassandra would never look. Cassandra did not read prayer books. Sir Henry's hand moved over the paper as though to physically anchor it. He said, in the cautious voice of a magistrate beginning to draft a case, that this was a serious accusation, that they would need additional evidence, handwriting analysis, testimony from those who had heard the false will read at the funeral, depositions from the steward's family. Eliza assured him that she could produce all of these, and within a week. "Then why," said the Duke, "have you been carrying this in the spine of a prayer book for 5 years?" It was the right question. It was the question she had carried through every winter night in her father's house. She looked at him directly. He had grey eyes, clear, steady grey, the colour of slate after rain. "Because I was not yet ready to leave," she said. "I had no money, I had no kin. My stepmother had told everyone I was unwell. Delicate, she called me, which is the polite word for half-mad. I could not have stood in any room in this county a year ago and been believed. I had to make myself into a person who could be believed before I could ask anyone to believe me." The Duke set the page down. He looked at her for a long moment, and she had the strange impression that he was not assessing, confirming. "Sir Henry," he said, "could you give Miss Vance and me 5 minutes?" The magistrate hesitated. Then, with the tact of an experienced man, he stood. "I will ring for tea." When the door closed, the Duke spoke without preamble. He explained, in the level tone of a man who had clearly briefed cabinets, that he had come into the county a fortnight earlier to investigate the management of 3 estates. Vance Hall, he conceded, was the third, on behalf of a colleague at the Court of Chancery. He had begun to suspect Lady Cassandra of irregularities. He had not, until that morning, 10 minutes earlier, known that she had a stepdaughter she had been keeping under what amounted to house arrest. Eliza's mouth went dry. "You knew?" "I suspected. I did not know to what extent. I had not, until 10 minutes ago, known that you existed." "I have existed for 26 years. I am aware of that now." There was a beat of silence in the room that was not silence. The fire shifted in the grate. Somewhere upstairs, a clock struck. "What do you require of me, Your Grace?" "Nothing," he said. "But I am going to require a great deal of Lady Cassandra, and it is going to take some weeks to assemble. In those weeks, you cannot go back to Vance Hall." "I have nowhere else to go." "You have," said the Duke. "An aunt I happen to know in Bath, and if her hospitality does not suit, you may stay at my sister's house in Cheltenham. Both are respectable. Both would be glad to know you. They have known of your mother." He was not asking. He was not making it a favor. He was, she realized slowly, simply removing an obstacle from her path. As if her path were obvious. As if her path had been obvious to him within 10 minutes of entering the room. She told him, with the half-laugh of a woman noticing the absurdity of her own situation, that she did not even know his given name. He gave it to her. Theodore, of the Sinclair family. Friends used Theo. His stepmother, he noted with the briefest twitch of the mouth, used Marbury. The detail surprised her. She had not, in the heat of the morning, registered that a man like the Duke might have a stepmother of his own. When she asked whether his was a kind one, he considered the question with the seriousness it did not merit. "She is, I think, the sort of stepmother who would call yours an amateur." A laugh came out of Eliza before she had agreed to allow it. It surprised her. It surprised him, too. She saw it in the small, unwilling lift at the corner of his mouth. The first crack in a face she would later come to understand as one that did not crack often. She did not stay at the magistrate's house. She required, she explained, 4 hours and 1 trunk. She required to be seen in Vance Hall once more, in daylight, before she left it. Otherwise, Lady Cassandra would tell every neighbour for miles that the girl had run mad and been taken to Bedlam. The Duke offered to escort her. She declined. Sir Henry sent his second son and the groom. The Duke followed, a quarter of an hour behind, in his own carriage. Lady Cassandra was in the morning room, doing her correspondence. She was a woman of 47, who had taken excellent care of her hair, and excellent care of her enemies. The colour of her gown that morning was a deep claret silk that should have been worn only by women under 30, and that suited her without apology. She did not stand when Eliza entered. She lifted one perfect dark brow. "You are filthy. Where have you been?" "At Sir Henry's." The brow remained lifted. "You went to the magistrate, at dawn, without a chaperone, without my permission." "Eliza, my dear, it is increasingly difficult to keep telling people you are merely fragile." "I have come to collect my mother's books." "Your mother's books are mine." "My mother's books are mine, as is the pearl pendant you have been searching the house for, since I have it on now and you cannot find it. As is the morning room, as is the rose garden, as is the house. I am informing you of this in person because I want you to know that I knew it before today, and I want you to remember the precise hour at which I told you." It was the first time in 5 years that Eliza had spoken to her stepmother as her father's daughter, rather than as a frightened girl. The effect was instructive. Lady Cassandra's face did not change. The pen in her hand dropped just once against the inkwell. "Eliza." "Lady Vance." "You will sit down." "I will not." "You will sit down, my dear, or I will be forced to call Dr. Whitcomb to declare what we have all been gently postponing for years." "I have just left the magistrate, Cassandra." Eliza had never used the name without title before. "He is in possession this morning of my father's true will, the one in the spine of my mother's prayer book, the one you did not look for because you do not read prayer books, the one in which you receive £100 a year, the one in which I receive everything else." For perhaps 3 seconds, Lady Cassandra did not breathe. Eliza could see it. The slight stilling of the lace at her throat. Then, very smoothly, she said, "Then I will deny it." "I assumed you would." "And who," said Lady Cassandra, "do you imagine will be believed? A spinster who has not been seen in society for 5 years, kept in seclusion for her own protection, against the word of her own mother?" "You are not my mother." "I have been your mother for 16 years. "You have been my father's wife for 16 years. That is a different thing." Lady Cassandra rose. She was the taller woman. She crossed the room in 3 deliberate steps, and she did not raise her hand because she knew, after 16 years, that she did not need to raise her hand to make Eliza flinch. Eliza did not flinch. The door behind them opened. Sir Henry's groom, holding his hat. "Miss Vance, His Grace has arrived. He is waiting in the carriage." "His Grace," repeated Lady Cassandra. "The Duke of Marbury," said the groom. He looked very carefully at the floor. Lady Cassandra's face did something that was not quite shock and not quite calculation. It was both. Eliza had a single, perfect moment of clarity, in which she understood that her stepmother had been waiting all along for some duke or earl to come and notice a Vance daughter, and that she had not believed it would be this one. "You will not leave this house with him." "I will. I will not allow it. You no longer have the power to allow or disallow." For the first time, the voice was not silken. It was the voice of a woman recalculating, and Eliza heard it the way one hears a violin string under sudden tension. Lady Cassandra began to speak, and what came out of her was a long, smoothly assembled appeal. That there was a great deal Eliza did not yet understand. That her father had carried debts she had been too young to be told about. That the household accounts were more complicated than a girl of 26 could possibly read. That there were arrangements which had been made for the protection of the family name, and which a magistrate would never grasp. The appeal was delivered standing, with one hand braced lightly on the back of the chair, the way a woman braces against a wind she has not quite yet decided to lean into. Eliza counted the rooks through the window over her stepmother's shoulder. There were 4. She allowed Cassandra precisely 1 minute by the morning room clock before she informed her, quietly, that she would be leaving with her trunk. Lady Cassandra used the minute. She used it to say 6 different things, each of which was a different shape of the same threat. By the time the minute was over, Eliza had her hand on the door. "You will regret this," said Lady Cassandra. "That has been said to me," said Eliza, "by every person who has ever wished I was smaller. Goodbye, Cassandra." She walked out of the morning room. She walked down the corridor. She walked into the spring sunshine. The Duke was at the carriage door. He held his hand out to her without comment. She put hers into it. The Duke's sister lived in a pale yellow house on a quiet square in Cheltenham. Lady Sinclair Whitmore, Beatrice, was 29, recently married, and possessed of the kind of sharp, generous face that made strangers tell her things they had never meant to say. She took one look at Eliza on the doorstep and dispatched her own husband to the wine merchant. She did not know, she remarked dryly on the way to the parlour, whether Eliza took wine, but it seemed likely that one of them would need it, and Beatrice was not inclined to drink alone on a stranger's first afternoon. Eliza confessed she had not had wine in 5 years. Beatrice judged this excellent, and proposed they begin with a small glass and progress as required. Beatrice asked no questions for the first 3 days. She fed Eliza. She allowed her to sleep until 11 if she wished. She lent her 3 gowns of her own, a cream muslin, a peacock blue afternoon dress, a saffron yellow evening gown, and never mentioned the colour of the gown Eliza had arrived in. On the 4th day, over breakfast, she announced that Theo would be there at 12, that he would want to know what evidence remained to be gathered, and that she had instructed her brother that Eliza would deliver a written list rather than a conversation, because Eliza was tired. Eliza found she was tired, and accepted the arrangement gratefully. The Duke arrived at 12. He bowed. Eliza gave him a list. He read it, made 3 notes, and asked her, with the careful protocol of a man who had clearly considered every possible objection in advance, whether she would walk with him in the garden for a quarter of an hour. Beatrice's kitchen window faced the garden, he pointed out. She would be fully chaperoned and free to go inside whenever she chose. She went into the garden. The garden was small, walled, and full of tulips so deep a ruby red that they appeared, in the morning light, to have absorbed colour from the brick they were planted against. He did not speak for a moment. He walked at her pace, which was slow. He owed her an apology, he said. He had not, he explained, found her sooner. There had been rumours for 2 years. A daughter said to be unwell, a household where no one was admitted. And he had been busy with other shapes, and he should have followed the thread earlier. You did not know me. He conceded that. He had known the shape of the thing, however, and he had been busy with other shapes, and he was sorry. It would not, he said, happen again. It cannot happen again. I am not in that house any longer. I meant, he said, in any future shape that I might be inattentive to, of any kind. Eliza did not answer immediately. She understood, with the quiet shock of a person who has lived for years on rationed honesty, that this was not a flirtation. He was telling her something true. He was, in his careful, measured way, signaling that he intended to pay attention to her, for the duration of an investigation, certainly, but possibly longer. Your Grace, Theo, please. In the garden, when no one is listening, my Christian name will do. Theo, why? Why what? Why are you doing this? The investigation, the aunt in Bath, your sister's house, the list, the garden. He stopped walking. He looked at the wall behind her, at the espaliered pear tree, the brick that had been laid in a herringbone, for long enough that she began to think he would not answer. Because, he said at last, when I came into Sir Henry's morning room, and you were standing at the window counting the rooks, I had the impression that you had been counting things that were not rooks for a long time. And I should like, eventually, for there to be fewer things you have to count. The tulips moved in a small wind. Eliza did not look at him. She looked at her own hands. They were shaking slightly, which surprised her. That is a very long answer for a question I asked plainly. Yes, I am sorry. Do not be sorry. It was the right answer. The Duke remained in Cheltenham for 9 days. They walked in Beatrice's garden every afternoon. He brought new evidence each time, testimonies from former servants of Vance Hall, the rector's eventual confession, the steward's old letters. Eliza brought him her father's letters and her mother's prayer book, and she opened, line by line, the household she had been forced to remember in pieces. On the 7th day, he brought a banker. He required her signature, he explained, on a chancery filing, drafted by his family solicitor since the previous Tuesday, that would freeze Cassandra's access to the estate accounts pending the hearing. She might sign, or she might decline. The choice was hers alone. She signed. On the 8th day, he brought a question. The hearing, he reminded her, would not be for 3 months. In the meantime, her stepmother retained her position in the county. She would write letters, visit neighbours, and recast Eliza, with some success, as the unstable one, since Eliza had indeed been kept from society for 5 years. Yes, she required, he said with the careful diction of a man who had rehearsed and was now reciting, a position in the county that her stepmother could not reach by any letter or any visit. The estate, he agreed, would be hers after the hearing, but a hearing was 3 months away, and 3 months was the kind of interval in which a woman of Lady Cassandra's particular gifts could ruin a great many things. She turned to look at him. The wind had moved his hair into his eyes, which made him look younger and slightly less impossible. She saw, for the first time, that he was nervous. What position do you propose, Theo? The proposal that followed was delivered in the language of a man who had been thinking about it for 14 days and was no longer certain it sounded the way he had meant it to sound. Marriage. To him. As soon as the banns could be read. The position of Duchess of Marbury was a public, irreversible fact. A perimeter, he called it. A fortification, he corrected himself, with the immediate apology of someone who recognized that this was poor language for a proposal. It is honest language, she said. He went on, his voice careful, the voice of a man who had not made a private declaration in some years and was finding it harder than the public declarations he made in his work. He would not, he said, propose marriage as a strategy alone. The strategy was sound, he conceded that, frankly. But there were reasons that were not strategic, and he would be a coward if he did not tell her so. What reasons? In the morning room, when you said you had counted to 38. He had not, he confessed, been able to forget the number. Every flock of rooks he had passed in the last fortnight he had counted, by reflex. He knew the count at Sir Henry's gate, at his own house, at Beatrice's. He was, he said with a thin, self-conscious smile, keeping a quiet watch on the rookeries of 3 counties, in case they ever again represented the worst hour of someone's morning. Eliza laughed. She did not mean to. It came out of her with the particular relief of a sound she had not used in years. That is... Theo, that is the most ridiculous reason. Yes. It is also the best. Then, she looked up at him through the deep ruby tulips. He was waiting. The whole man was waiting. A duke at 28, with a chancery file and a list of witnesses, and a fortune of his own, and the careful, quiet attention of someone who had not, in all his years of training, been taught how to manage the moment of being chosen. I would like, she said, to be married in the rose garden at Vance Hall. You? In the garden at Vance Hall. In my mother's rose garden. With Cassandra at home, and not invited, and watching from a window if she chooses. I want her to see me become a woman she cannot touch. I want her to see it happen on the ground she stole from my mother. He breathed out, a long, surprised breath of laughter and assent. Miss Vance. Eliza. Eliza. We will be married in your mother's rose garden. We will time it for the 3rd week of June, when the white roses are at their peak. We will have witnesses your stepmother cannot dispute. And we will, if you like, leave the front gate open on the morning, in case she chooses to walk through it. She will choose to walk through it. I rather hope she does. The next 6 weeks were a campaign. Beatrice taught Eliza to ride again. Eliza had not ridden in 5 years. Her stepmother had said horses were dangerous for delicate constitutions. She rediscovered her seat in 3 afternoons. She visited the dressmaker. She chose, at Beatrice's recommendation, a wedding gown of pale rose silk. The colour, said Beatrice firmly, of a woman who has stopped apologizing, and an overcloak of the deepest emerald velvet for the journey to the chapel. The Duke, meanwhile, gathered evidence. He spoke to former servants. He took depositions from creditors. He cross-examined the steward's widow and the rector's curate. He travelled twice to London. He sent letters in his neat, slanted hand, which was, Eliza noticed one afternoon, very nearly the hand her father's letters had been written in. She did not know what to make of that. She did not have to make anything of it. It was simply true. On the 3rd Tuesday of May, 2 events happened on the same day. The first was that Lady Cassandra, without warning, rode into Cheltenham. She arrived at Beatrice's pale yellow house at 3 in the afternoon, in the deep claret silk that was now becoming a habit, and asked for Eliza by name. Beatrice was out. The housekeeper was new. The housekeeper let her in. Eliza was at her writing desk in the library when the door opened, and her stepmother walked in. You did not write, said Lady Cassandra, by way of greeting. No. I came to see whether you had recovered. I have. From what, my dear? From the long, delicate illness, said Eliza, which was not, as it turns out, an illness. Lady Cassandra walked to the window. The light was kind to her. The light had always been kind to her. She looked out at the small Cheltenham Square, the iron railings, the budding chestnuts, and she did not turn around when she spoke. She had come, she announced, the announcement made to the window, not the room, to give Eliza an opportunity. She framed what followed as charity, a settlement, no courts, no public hearing. 6,000 a year, a retirement to Brighton, the estate divided, the matter quietly closed. Eliza, by Cassandra's arithmetic, would be free. I am already free, Cassandra. You are about to be in the public eye. People will ask why your stepmother is not at the wedding. People will count things. The Duke has enemies. He has political enemies. They will use anything. They will use you. The threat was delivered with the care of a woman who had spent decades calibrating the precise pressure required to bend a younger woman's resolve. Eliza had been measured by that pressure for 16 years. She knew its weight in her shoulders. She knew, today, that it had stopped working. "They may try," she said. "You are a very young woman. You do not know the kind of thing they will say. I know the kind of thing you will say." Lady Cassandra turned. The light caught her, and Eliza saw, for the first time, that her stepmother was frightened. Not of the law, not of the hearing, of something more particular. She tried then what Eliza later understood to be the last private appeal of a woman who had spent her career being persuasive. "The Duke," she said. "The wedding. The house." Eliza did not understand the cost of having such things. Standing in front of all those people, being looked at, judged. Eliza had not been looked at in 5 years. Eliza was not ready. "Cassandra," said Eliza gently, "you did not keep me out of society for 5 years to protect me. You kept me out of society for 5 years because you knew that the day the county saw me again, they would understand at once that I had been kept, and then they would ask why. I will ruin the wedding." It was said quietly, almost flatly, the way a woman states a fact she has resolved upon, not threatens it. Eliza did not speak for a moment. She closed the inkwell. She set the pen on its rest. She looked at her stepmother across the small, yellow library, and she felt, for the first time since the morning at Sir Henry's, perfectly steady. "You will try," she said. "I think we both know that." What she said next was the longest sustained sentence she had ever delivered to her stepmother, and she delivered it in the voice of a woman who had not raised her voice. She would not, she said, ask Cassandra to come to the wedding. She was not so naive as to believe Cassandra would behave at it if she did. But if Cassandra arrived, she would arrive into a garden that had been prepared for her. The wedding would not go the way Cassandra imagined. Eliza expected to see her in 3 weeks. The Duke and she would be at the front of the rose garden. The roses would be white. Eliza would be wearing pale rose. Cassandra would know her by the pearl that had been searched for in that house for 5 years and had never been found. Lady Cassandra left the library without speaking. Eliza sat at the writing desk for some time afterwards and did not return to her letter. She did not weep. Her hands had stopped shaking some weeks earlier. She noticed this only now, when there should have been a reason for them to shake. The second event of that Tuesday was a letter from the Duke. He had returned from London. He had, he wrote in his close, neat hand, found something. He would call in the morning. He requested that she sit down before he told her, although he did not say what it was. He arrived at 10. He brought a small leather case. Inside the case was a single sheet of paper, very old, signed by Eliza's mother. It was a letter, undated, but written in the year before her mother's last illness. It was addressed to "My dearest, my wisest girl," on the day she turns 21, and it had been intercepted by Lady Cassandra and held for 7 years in a locked drawer, which the Duke had, through means he did not entirely explain, had opened. Eliza read the letter twice. Then she read it again. Then she put her face into her hands, and she allowed herself, for the first time in 5 years, to weep. The Duke did not move. He did not touch her. He did not say it would be all right. He waited, quietly, in Beatrice's library, while Eliza Vance read her late mother's words, about a woman she had not yet, on the day the letter was written, become. When she lifted her head, he gave her a clean handkerchief, without looking at her. He said only, "The pendant is mentioned in the letter. The pearl. Your mother left it for you, specifically and by name. It was not Lady Cassandra's to take. It was never hers to look for. I know. Now you have a letter that says so. Yes, he said very quietly, but he would not pretend he had not noticed that this was the first time she had wept in front of him. He would, if she wished, pretend that he was not in love with her. He was. He thought she should know. It was, he said, what he would want to know if he were standing where she stood. She did not answer immediately. She folded the letter. She put it back in the leather case. She set the case on the writing desk between them, and she put her hand on top of it, very carefully. She told him then, in the level voice of a woman delivering an inventory she had been keeping for some time, that she had been in love with him since the morning at Sir Henry's, when he had asked why she had been carrying the prayer book for 5 years. She had not been permitted to be in love with anyone since she was 15, and so she had needed several weeks to recognize what she was doing. She would not pretend she had not known it. She would not pretend that he had not been the reason. He took her free hand. He turned it over. He did not kiss it. He simply held it, palm up, fingers loose, as though her hand in the last 6 weeks had become a thing he had been waiting to be given. Eliza. Theo. On Saturday, 3 weeks from now, in your mother's rose garden, with the white roses at their peak. Yes. The morning of the wedding came warm and clear. The white roses at Vance Hall had, by the household's accident, or by the head gardener's quiet rebellion, opened the day before. The rose garden smelled of damp earth and honey, and the particular sweetness that comes of a flower being at the exact height of its bloom on the exact morning it is most needed. Eliza dressed in her childhood bedroom. The room had been emptied of the small chair her stepmother had moved into it as an offense 3 years past. Beatrice and Beatrice's own daughter, a serious child of 8 named Maud, attended her. Maud held the pale rose silk gown out at arm's length and pronounced, with the gravity of a courtroom usher, that this was the most beautiful color she had ever seen in her life, and she would require one for her own wedding. Eliza promised her one in whatever color she chose. Maud reflected for a moment of considerable seriousness and confirmed, pale rose. Eliza promised her pale rose. Mrs. Pendle, the Duke's housekeeper at Marbury, had come for the morning to help with the hair. She was a woman of 60, with very strong opinions and no inclination to keep them to herself. She brushed Eliza's hair back from her face and informed her, with the gravity of a woman who had known His Grace since he was 9, that she had observed His Grace through the usual phases, the awkward boy, the silent boy, the Duke in training, and that she had not, in 20 years, seen him as foolish as he had been about Miss Vance these last 6 weeks. He whistled, Mrs. Pendle reported, in the corridors. She had not heard the man whistle since his father's funeral, and she chose to take this as an excellent sign. Thank you, Mrs. Pendle. Mrs. Pendle then proceeded to deliver, with the gravity of a steward briefing a general, the morning's order of battle. The rose garden was filling. The Duchess of Lansdowne had arrived the previous afternoon, and had pronounced the white roses adequate. The Earl of Cumberford had come up from Bath and was walking the gravel path with a stick. A magistrate. 3 solicitors. A young man from London, whom Mrs. Pendle suspected of being a newspaper man, and to whom she had, on the principle of generous hospitality, offered tea. 9 clergymen. Excessive, by Mrs. Pendle's count, but they were friends of the Duke's father's family, and they liked to be present. And, at the front gate, a small tactical contingent. Beatrice glanced up sharply. The contingent, Mrs. Pendle clarified, consisted of 2 of Sir Henry's men, the Duke's groom, and Mrs. Pendle herself when required. They would, between them, know if she came. Maud, from behind a cloud of pale rose silk, asked whether Cassandra would in fact come, and Mrs. Pendle expressed the considered view that she rather expected she would. Lady Cassandra was the kind of woman who took invitations she had not received. Eliza pronounced this good. Beatrice, surprised, asked her to repeat it. Eliza did. She would prefer, she said, that Cassandra come, that Cassandra do in front of 9 clergymen and a newspaper man, the thing she had come to do. She would prefer the matter settled in public, on this ground, today. Beatrice gave a very small laugh. Theo, she admitted, had predicted exactly this. He had instructed her to have the steward arrange a chair for Cassandra at the front. Eliza asked if it had been done. It had been, Beatrice said. The chair was reserved. It bore Lady Cassandra's name. Then we are ready. She went down the staircase her father had gone down. She walked through the hall her mother had walked through. She walked across the threshold she had crossed 5 weeks earlier, in mud and rain. The morning held. The rose garden had been transformed. Chairs in rows, white roses, ivory ribbons on the wrought iron arch. The Duke at the far end of the path, in a coat the colour of indigo silk, broad-shouldered and very still. He turned when she stepped onto the path. He saw her in pale rose, with the pearl at her throat, with the sun behind her. And he forgot. She could see it in his face. For one instant, the entire ceremony. She walked up the path. She put her hand into his. The rector began. She had reached the words, "and forsaking all other," when the sound she had spent 6 weeks preparing for arrived at the back of the garden gate, the iron hinge that had not been oiled in 20 years, the slow, controlled creak of a woman who wanted everyone in the rose garden to hear her arrive. The whole assembly turned, with the unified slowness of a flock of birds reading the wind. The rector did not turn. The rector had been told. "This wedding cannot proceed. I am the bride's mother. I forbid it." Eliza did not turn around immediately. She felt the Duke's hand tighten around hers. Once, briefly, a private pressure, and then loosen. He released her hand. He took half a step forward, so that he was between her and the gate. She turned then, slowly, with the pearl visible at her throat. Lady Cassandra had come in claret silk. She had dressed as she would for a wedding she expected to ruin. Her hair was perfect. Her face was perfect. She was, in every measurable way, a very beautiful woman of 47, and she stood at the top of the rose garden with the spring wind in her gown and the entire county between her and her stepdaughter. And she said again, more loudly. She lifted her voice for the assembly, and what followed was the speech she had been writing in her head for 6 weeks. She was the bride's mother. The wedding would not proceed. The young woman before them was not what she had presented herself to be. She had been confined in the house for her own protection these many years. She was not of sound mind. She was not in any position to enter into a binding marriage. Every person present was a witness. Every person present would be required to... "Lady Vance!" The Duke's voice cut through the garden. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The garden simply went quiet, the way a room of horses goes quiet when one of them lifts its head. "Lady Vance," he said again, "we have prepared a chair for you at the front. Would you take it, please?" "I will not." "I am asking you to take the chair, Lady Vance, because what is about to happen will be easier for you to absorb if you are seated." Lady Cassandra hesitated. The hesitation was a single, fatal beat. Sir Henry stepped forward from where he had been standing, so that, only now, the wedding party realized the magistrate had been positioned at the midpoint of the aisle for reasons of his own. He was holding a leather case. He was not smiling. Sir Henry spoke briefly, in the practiced, level manner of a magistrate addressing a public room. He informed Lady Cassandra, and by extension the entire assembly, that he held that morning the Court of Chancery's preliminary report on the estate of the late Lord Vance, signed and to be entered formally on Monday next. That any claim Lady Cassandra made now about the bride's mental state would be heard by witnesses, each of whom would be deposed within the week, and that she would, he advised her with great care, be bound by every word she chose to say between this moment and the conclusion of the ceremony. Lady Cassandra's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The Duke continued evenly. The will Lady Cassandra had produced at Lord Vance's funeral was a forgery. The original, recovered from the spine of a prayer book the previous month, was in the Chancery file. The pendant at the bride's throat had been bequeathed to her in a letter intercepted by Lady Cassandra and held in a locked drawer for 7 years. The estate accounts, since Lord Vance's funeral, had been audited by an officer of the court. The findings were conclusive. Lady Vance, the Duke concluded, the courtesy of the title still extended, with the precision of a man who did not waste cruelty, had been drawing £14,000 a year against an estate to which she had been entitled to 100. Did she wish, he asked, to enter the chair? Lady Cassandra looked, for one long moment, at the gate. Sir Henry's 2 men stood at the gate. She did not run. Whatever she had been in her long career, she had not been a woman who ran. She walked, instead, with the same slow inevitability with which she had crossed Vance Hall's morning room 6 weeks earlier, and she took her place in the chair that had been set out for her. She sat. She placed her hands in her lap. She lifted her chin. She did not speak again. The rector, who, to his credit, had not moved during any of this, looked at the Duke. The Duke looked at Eliza. "Miss Vance," said the Duke, "I should very much like to continue the ceremony, if you are willing." Eliza turned, deliberately, to face Lady Cassandra. She walked 3 steps from the altar toward the chair. She did not speak loudly. She spoke at the volume of a woman addressing a single person in a quiet room. "Cassandra, look at me." Lady Cassandra lifted her eyes. "You came to ruin my wedding." "You did not. You came to expose me." "You did not. You came to make me afraid in front of all these people." "I am not afraid. There is nothing left in your hand. There is nothing left in your name. You will sit on this chair, and you will witness, with the rest of the county, what I have walked toward for 5 years. And then, when it is finished, you will leave Vance Hall. The Duke's men will accompany you. You will be received at Sir Henry's house, where you will remain until the hearing. You will not return to my mother's rooms. You will not return to my mother's garden. You will not return." She paused. "Thank you for coming. It is fitting that you should be present. My mother would have liked it, I think." She turned back to the altar. She put her hand into the Duke's hand. She did not look at her stepmother again. The rector cleared his throat. "Where were we? Yes, and forsaking all other—" The wedding finished without further interruption. Eliza Vance became Eliza, Duchess of Marbury, in the rose garden at Vance Hall, in pale rose silk and emerald velvet, with the white roses at their peak and her mother's pearl at her throat. The county watched. The newspaper man wrote a number of things into a small black book. The 9 clergymen were extraneous, as Mrs. Pendle had predicted, but pleased to have been included. Lady Cassandra was escorted from the garden by Sir Henry's men before the wedding breakfast. She did not speak to Eliza again. She would, in the next 18 months, sign a number of papers acknowledging the forgery, accept a settlement of £100 a year, and remove herself, on her own terms, to a small house on the Sussex coast, where she would not be welcome to anyone of consequence, and where she would write a great many letters that no one would answer. She would not see Eliza again. 6 months later, in late November, Eliza walked into the rose garden at Vance Hall with Mrs. Pendle's daughter, a girl of 19 named Anna, whom Eliza had taken on as a companion, and stood in front of the same iron arch where she had been married. The roses were brown stems now. Frost had taken the last of them the week before. The garden looked very small in winter. "Your Grace," said Anna kindly, "it will be summer again." "Yes." "I've brought your shawl. It is the indigo one. You always reach for the indigo one." "Thank you." The Duke came out of the house. He had been in the steward's office going over accounts that Lady Cassandra had not been permitted to touch in some months. He walked across the lawn the way men walk who are no longer in a hurry. He stopped at her shoulder. He did not speak. They stood together, not touching, looking at the arch. "Theo," said Eliza after some time. "Yes?" "I have been counting things." "Have you?" "The rooks, the chimneys, the black bricks in the lower wall. There are 81 of them, by the way, which is unsatisfactory." "It is." "I find," she said, "that I do not need to count any more. I am doing it for the pleasure of it, not because I am afraid." "Yes." "That is different." "Yes." She turned to him. He looked at her, at the pearl at her throat, at the indigo shawl, at the small, settled face of a woman who had not been frightened in some weeks. And he allowed himself, for the second time in 8 months, the small, unwilling lift at the corner of his mouth. "I love you," he said. "I know." "You always know." "I learned it from counting. You watch the same thing for long enough, you know what comes next." He laughed, quietly from his chest, the laugh she had heard for the first time in Cheltenham and had been collecting since. "Theo." "Yes?" "Read me my mother's letter again when we go in. The whole letter. I want to hear it in your voice now, not in mine." "I will read it to you every year," he said, "on the day you turn 21, although you have, technically, passed that anniversary." "Then read it to me on every other day instead." "Every other day," he agreed. They walked back to the house. The chimneys were pale against the November sky. Mrs. Pendle had a fire going in the morning room, the one that had once been Lady Cassandra's. The pearl at Eliza's throat caught the light from the open door. From somewhere inside the house, Maud, visiting for the week, was practicing an extremely confident, slightly inaccurate piece on the pianoforte. Eliza put her hand on the doorframe. She held it the way a sailor holds a mast in calm weather, not for steadying, for pleasure. "What is left?" she said quietly, "when the lie is taken away?" "What is yours?" said the Duke. "Always, Eliza." He held the door open for her, and she walked into her house. If you've ever waited longer than you thought you could to be believed, to be seen, to walk into a room as the person you actually are, tell me in the comments. And if you'd like more stories like Eliza's, where the woman the world tried to make small turns out, in the end, to take up exactly the room she was always meant to fill, subscribe to Adrian's Fireside Stories. I will be here, by the fire, with another one for you next week.